Hi, this is Zach with Warner Wound, and today I'll be taking a look at the Tudor Pelagos LHD. Tudor surprised everyone a few months back with this watch. It was kind of a mid-year release, nothing to do with bezel or anything like that. And they decided to drop something that was, very exciting and kind of risky in some ways for the brand, and really only, the third update ever to the Pelagos, which was frankly in kind of need of some attention. So what they did with this watch, it should be very clear, kind of looking at it, is they flipped the case around, made it left-hand drive, as the LHD stands for, also referred to often as destro style. But then they also kind of did some different styling tweaks to the watch, if you will. So the reason that they kind of did the left-hand crown was to base it on a kind of an old model that was, they had a vintage model of the Tudor Submariner that they had issued with the crown on the left side. I believe it was like a special military order. So that was kind of how they justified doing this. But it also gave them kind of the permission to then kind of make this watch a little bit more vintage. In the Tudor line, the Black Bay and the Pelagos being their kind of most popular watches, the kind of modern dive watches. The Black Bay definitely has the vintage feeling, whereas the Pelagos is kind of their modern tool watch. It's titanium of 500 meters, has a helium escape valve, ceramic bezel. It's really, it's a very kind of solid sport watch offering, and definitely, a watch that can be used in rugged environments. So it always had a kind of modern edge to it. So in this model, though, they stylized it and gave it a little bit more of a vintage flair. So you'll see that in the colors of the lume, the red on the dial, and the cool roulette date wheel. So these things combine together to make what is, like I said, a very surprising watch for the brand, one that it kind of breaks with somewhat more conservative choices that, Tudor and their sister brand Rolex sometimes make. And it's very exciting, and so obviously got a really kind of great response. Because this is the modern generation of the Pelagos, it does feature their in-house movement. So specifically, that's the MT561-LHD. It obviously was modified a little bit to have a different date wheel, to be kind of set up like this, so the dates flipped. Every time they kind of change a little thing, they give a little bit of a different name to the movement. But just to quickly kind of jump into that, that's an in-house movement, 25 joule automatic, 70-hour power reserve, silicon escapement, and it's COSC rated. So it's a very impressive movement in terms of the stats. And this watch comes in at $4,400 MSRP. That includes a bracelet as well as the rubber strap you see here. So it's actually very kind of interesting price point. They're definitely competing for kind of that sport watch, entry-level luxury sport watch price point, and I think they're offering something really competitive at that price point. So let's take a closer look now. The case of the Tudor Pelagos LHD remains the same as the previous version of the Pelagos, which is the in-house version, which I believe increased in height a little bit from the original ETA 2824 version. The difference being obviously that it is flipped around. But so for the size of it is 42 millimeters in diameter, 43 at the edge of the bezel actually, 50 millimeters lug to lug, and 14.45 millimeters tall. The design of the case is actually very similar to the Black Bay, save that it has crown guards and a helium escape valve. And of course, it is made of titanium. So it is a lighter weight watch, though it isn't a very light titanium watch. It still has a nice bit of heft to it. And the case has been brushed all around. The finishing on this case, I think, is something really worth note. Really beautiful, sharp lines all around, really clean brushing. One of the things that I critiqued a little bit about the Black Bay was that because of the large height of the watch, the tall, polished sides felt a little bit too big. Here, the sides, not only are they brushed, which kind of breaks it up a little bit, but they are more adorned, which I'll show you now. On the right side, you then have the helium escape valve, which obviously breaks up that side, which would have otherwise been totally flat. And you can see the brushing here. It's very clean. I do mind the scrapes here. This is a sample model that has been around, I think, quite a bit. And you can see how this bevel runs all the way around. And it's a really beautiful, sharp bevel. And I like that it has a slightly different sheen to it, though it's not a full polish, so it's not like a blinging line. I personally am of the kind of opinion that dive watches should be mostly brushed and really save polishing. So I like that the treatment here, while still having some decorative elements, is still got that rugged tool feeling to it. Quickly looking at the other side now, the crown side. So obviously you have the same large crown here and crown guards. It's a beautiful crown guard design, actually, the way they kind of sculpt in and then they're slightly rounded from both sides. It has a really just nicely machined look to it. And once again, that goes to kind of breaking up that side a little bit more. So this just feels a lot less massive than it did on the Black Bay where it was polished. The bezel of the Pelagos is a real highlight of the watch in terms of just kind of feel. The insert here is matte ceramic, which is fairly uncommon. Usually you see high gloss ceramic, so that's very cool. I think it works a lot better with the titanium case as well as the overall, more toolish, rugged feeling of this watch. The loomed inserts there are glow really bright. And as you can see here versus the other ones, the loom coloring is actually kind of a creamy color. That's one of the big differences between this watch and the previous Pelagoses that despite, other than the obviously flipped arrangement. So it has more of a vintage aged look to it, which is what I was saying. They kind of brought that vintage feel to it. That's something they had previously only saved for the Black Bay. And I happen to really like the look of that. It's a little bit warmer. It just, kind of has an interesting, almost strange kind of glow to it. But it does still glow actually the same icy blue. We're talking about the bezel mechanism itself. One of the nice things about the bezel is actually how it overhangs a little bit. That was also something I critiqued on the Black Bay. That bezel runs flush to the case, so it's actually a little, you can slip on it. Here, it's very easy to grip, and then you have that great snap of the unidirectional bezel, which also locks at 60. It takes a little extra pressure to turn it from there, which is a really, really cool detail of the watch. One of the new features of the Pelagos is also the fact that it's a numbered series, and I believe a limited edition too, though I have not seen the actual amount that they are limiting it to. So previous models would have had no number here on the case back. In fact, I believe this is the first Tudor and perhaps the first Rolex, even kind of family watch in some time that they've numbered. That obviously implies that they want this watch to be collectible, with lower numbers perhaps going for greater values down the road. But it's smart of them to be building that into the watch because, as you know from the vintage watch market, Tudors demand quite a price. So they're kind of thinking into the future about that. Looking now at the dial of the Pelagos LHD, there's actually a lot to talk about. This is the first time we've reviewed the Pelagos on Worn and Wound, believe it or not. So there's a lot I kind of want to talk about that before even getting into the LHD modifications. So one of the really cool things about the Pelagos watch is that it stays true to the lineage of the Tudor snowflake submariners. That can be seen in the square markers and the snowflake hand of the hour hand here, as well as on the second hand. One of the things that always personally irks me about the Black Bay, though it's not like something you can't get over, was the fact that they mixed the snowflake hour hand with the kind of more traditional rounded Submariner kind of hour markers. So you had a kind of a mix of the two. Apparently that did exist once in the past, but it was definitely not a common model. And there's obvious kind of visual rhythm to having the snowflake hand with the square markers, which is why it works so well and looks so cool. And part of what's also so cool about it is that it was very distinctly Tudor, whereas the rounded markers were more, at this point now are very much associated with the Rolex Submariner. So this just really had this true kind of Tudor feeling to it. And they didn't just kind of remake a vintage watch with this. They took that and kind of progressed it forward and were like, this is what the modern, kind of snowflake Submariner is going to be. Obviously changed the name to Pelagos. But they built it out in all those other ways. There's a titanium, there's a 500 meter, the HEV, all that cool stuff. And then they modernized the way that dial was executed. And it's just a really cool modern tool watch, dial. So it has very much a sporty feeling to it, but it's executed in a way that I think, a brand like Tudor, being part of the Hans Willdorf family, kind of can only execute. So Here you have the markers. They're all applied. They are all now in this kind of warm beige color rather than the crisp white they used to be, which gives it that warmth that kind of has that vintage feel to it, a little bit more stylized. Those sit in this little chapter ring here, which is a detail I really, really like. Obviously, previous Submariners had a flat dial, or maybe even perhaps sometimes kind of almost a dome dial. Here they went for this much more modern look. So the dial stacks up. So you have the center, and then it kind of ramps into this little area that each of these markers sits within, which just has a really nice three-dimensional look to it. It also kind of condenses the dial a little bit. And then you have the chapter ring that's sitting up even higher at a steep angle, which gives you the individual minutes and seconds. So it's just a much more modern execution, much sportier, and I think just a very attractive kind of look to it. Now, when the very original Pelagos actually had 2 lines of text, is now kind of colloquially referred to as the 2-line Pelagos. When they went to the in-house model, they introduced this 5-line block here. It's a controversial detail. It's one that kind of, it's divisive for sure. So the text here reads, Pelagos, chronometer officially certified, rotor self-winding, 500 meters equals 1,640 feet. It's a lot of text and it's kind of redundant. So the chronometer officially certified, that's, obviously because of the in-house movement, definitely understand putting that there. Could that have been abbreviated? Perhaps, but that is kind of classic. Rolex, Tudor filling, the black base also have that. Then you have rotor self-winding. That's, it's an automatic watch. Does it really need to say that there? I don't know. And then the depth rating. So I certainly think they could have cut this down at least to 4 lines by getting rotor self-winding. But then the 5th line, the one at the top, says Pelagos. It's the name of the watch. You know the name of the watch. Do you really need that there? I don't think so. But on the LHD model, they did kind of help with this by making the Pelagos in red. So that once refers to, red submariners, double red sea dwellers, that whole history. It's a cool detail people are really going to like. And, I think it looks really cool here. And it kind of makes the Pelagos feel separate from that. So in some ways, it feels more like a 4-line. It still doesn't solve one of the other issues, though, with this text, which is the placement of it. That 500 meter, 1,640 feet, rides the very top of that 6 o'clock marker there. It simply feels too close. A little bit of space, I think, would have gone a long way for the whole thing. That if that had just been moved up a little bit closer to the center, more space around it might have felt a little bit less dense. But as is, with the unnecessary text, it just feels like a little bit of a misstep. One of the other differences is with the date. So there's actually been 3 changes here. There was the original 2824 model, then you had the change to the in-house, and now you have what's called the roulette date. So the big difference between the in-house versions and the 2024 versions was the placement of that date window. With the in-house movement, the date actually moved a little bit farther out. So what they did was drop what used to be a little loomed marker that was on the outside of the date to just have a date window. Once again, I think that is actually a little bit of a misstep on their part. Obviously, it has to do with the movement and how the date fit into that movement. But what was really nice on the 2824 model was that the date window being a little bit further in, it matched the size of the marker at 9, and then the little bit of loom on the side, the additional loom, applied loom marker, made it also the same width. So you had this really nice balance, on left and right. And then just, functionally in the dark, you didn't have a hole here. You still had a glowing marker. Is it the worst date window? Far from it. It's just that, having seen what they did with the 2-line, I do think that was a better design. Now with the Pelagos model, you have what's called this roulette date wheel. This is one of my favorite features of the watch. This is something you really don't see very often, and I have to give the brand a lot of props for doing this. So roulette date wheel is a date where is a wheel where the date alternates from black to red. So red on the even days, black on the odd days. It's a purely aesthetic detail at this point. I guess if you were, I don't really know honestly what the purpose of that would have been. You usually don't see it, saw it much less on sport watches, mostly on kind of dressier watches. You see that on some old Datejusts and stuff like that. It's really cool, very vintage, and just kind of adds personality. And when you have the red day, such as now with the 10, you have a little bit of that correspondence between the Pelagos in red there and then the date coming through. And I like that little hint of color. The last thing to consider, obviously you have the bezel insert here, very modern, very, crisp looking. Already talked about briefly in the case, but that gives you kind of the, classic dive arrangement as well as the added legibility of having, some numerals for the minutes. So just quickly, since we happen to have both in the office right now, I wanted to take a quick look at the LHD next to the original two-line Pelagos. Obviously you see the flipped case here, and then you see really how the difference in colors kind of really changes the overall feel of the watch. The very clean white markers on the original one give it a very modern feel, and I think they make it almost a little bit more, well, they do make it more monochromatic, which kind of makes the case feel a little bit cooler, a little bit more of kind of that like blue-gray titanium. Whereas on the Pelagos, the warm markers, that vintage feel, the little bit of red actually kind of brings out some of the warmth that's in titanium a little bit. So it has a little bit of a different feel there altogether. It's very hard to say. I think it's definitely a personal choice which one you would like more. I think this has this great modern crisp feel to it. Really speaks to the concept of the Pelagos being this very forward-thinking modern tool watch. This one then just has that extra kind of stylized feeling to it, taking a little bit from the Black Bay line. So, it all depends on kind of how you wear it, what you're looking for in the watch. Definitely cool that they offer both now, even if this one's limited. And then also quickly while looking at it, you can see the weighting here of the two-line text. It was very kind of clean. The typeface was a little bit larger. And then the 5 lines of text here, a little bit denser, closer to that marker there. There was just more breathing room. This has a much more kind of normal feel to it, whereas this feels heavy. And then you have that lume mark at 3 I was talking about, and you can see how that date window width matches increases with that lume marker, which sort of balances out the marker at 9, whereas on the modern ones, the in-house movement ones, you just have, you have no lume marker there, so you just have kind of a gap. Once again, like I said, not a bad execution, but this was really, really spot on. On the wrist, the Pelagos LHD wears well, but it is a large watch. This is also true with the Black Bay I reviewed before. The Pelagos is a little bit larger, and I've actually heard people say, "Oh, I like the Black Bay, but the Pelagos is too big." Honestly, I think it's splitting hairs there. They feel about the same on the wrist, at least in my opinion. The bezel is a little bit larger here, so it's got a little bit more kind of maybe a visually large feeling to it. But it doesn't really wear any different. The 50 millimeter lug to lug here stays the same, and that is a kind of a detail that, depending on your wrist size, might be too long or fit you just right. I think it's at kind of the top of my kind of limit here on a 7-inch wrist. But I've worn this watch quite a bit, and I've worn the previous Tudor Pelagos quite a bit. It grows on you very quickly. The slightly lighter weight of the titanium makes it more comfortable for a bulky watch. And then it's just very cool looking. I mean, it's a really striking watch, very kind of aggressive looking, but still speaks to that cool aesthetic of those vintage Tudor snowflakes that are so popular as well. So it really kind of just hits a lot of notes. The new left-hand version now, with that little bit of extra color, it's moodier looking, I think. It's a little bit darker, which I happen to like. And it brings to mind a watch that, and I mentioned this in my article when this first came out, has some similar qualities to it, which is the Sin EZM3. So that's also a destro-style dive watch. Now, obviously, both of these watches, you could say, well, this is to be worn in your right hand. This is for lefties. Sure, you can definitely do that if you're lefty and you want your crown facing out towards your hand. One of the things I really like about left side crowns is that on larger watches, it gets rid of the dig. So there's a logic towards having destro dive watches in particular, which tend to be larger. So the EZM3, the Sin, same exact thing. Crown is off at 9, and then you also have similar kind of lume color as well as a red date. So there is kind of a visual similarity to that, but then you get the other added aspects of the Tudor snowflake. So it's a very cool looking watch, very stylish. Here we have it on the rubber strap. This is what the sample came on. I think I prefer the bracelet style. I had a particularly cool bracelet. You get both with the watch though, so it doesn't really matter. But the bracelet, which we'll show you in a bit, just has some really cool features. As this is a very clean rubber strap, it's very comfortable. Has this cool Tudor, shield top clasp on it, which is a nice little bit of branding. It has fitted end links, which is a bit, I'm not 100% sure how I like that. One of the things I like about wearing watches on straps, whether it's rubber or leather, is that you get that little bit of a gap between the spot where the strap attaches and the actual case. And that further kind of defines the case. When you have the end links in here, it does kind of make the case feel like a more of a solid barrel. So you just lose sort of the definition of the lugs a little bit. That said, you have this nice rotation point. It makes the strap kind of flow very well. And it's a bit of a higher end offering. So on a $4,400 watch, I think it's really cool that they went the extra mile and gave you kind of the higher end version of the rubber strap, or frankly didn't make you go out and buy one yourself. So yeah, now I'm just going to take a quick look at the bracelet off of a watch. The Pelagos bracelet is worth a closer look. This is one that actually came off of that two-line Pelagos we showed you before. That is a very well-worn watch, so don't mind the scrapes and scratches that are on this, although this does give you a hint to what it will look like after 3 or 4 years of pretty regular wear. So obviously it doesn't stay pristine, and titanium has a kind of a tendency to scuff up quite a bit. But what's really cool about this bracelet is actually the clasp. So they have this ingenious little clasp here. You can see it has some interesting markings on it. What it is a spring-loaded clasp. So it actually expands with a spring here. So right now I'm pulling on it. But what's great with that is that it gives the whole thing a little bit of flex. So in terms of comfort throughout the day, if you drink a lot, if you eat a lot or something like that, and your wrist gets a little bit, larger, the bracelet won't necessarily feel tighter. It might actually grow a little bit with you. Plus, simply as you move and you flex your hand and your wrist, you'll see that this will bend, this will pull out a little bit. So it just doesn't have that tendency that sometimes really rigid bracelets do of sort of choking your wrist. It just adds comfort. It's a really cool design, and I think it adds some value to the overall watch. To wrap up, the Tudor Pelagos LHD is a really cool new watch from the brand. Like I said, this was an unexpected watch for them to drop. It was in the middle of kind of, no specific time frame, so nobody was anticipating a big release from the brand. And it's a strange one at that. The left-hand crown, that's not something you see very often, particularly from big name brands, because it's a little bit strange. It's definitely uncommon, might confuse some people. It's definitely more of a kind of a thing that kind of watch enthusiasts are going to kind of know about and be into. And I don't think the right-hand wrist crowd is really such a demanding market that they would do it just for that. And then the kind of play with color here, the adding of that lume, I think speaks to two things. One, obviously they had that watch that they say this one's based off of, but it also speaks to the fact that I think the black bay has become extremely successful for them, and that one has those vintage cues to it. And the Pelagos, while I still think a very successful watch, especially it's a great watch, it seemed to not be getting the same amount of buzz that the Black Bay was getting. I mean, when you see a Tudor on someone's wrist, it tends to be a Black Bay these days. So they try to bring some of that style into this, kind of make it a little bit more quirky, a little more fun, a little bit less kind of common looking. And in doing that, it ended up getting sort of, one of these kind of smaller independent watch brand feel to it. So I think they did a really good job of kind of adding a lot of personality to the watch. Did the Tudor Pelagos need that? Not necessarily, but I think it's cool that it's another offering from the brand. And then they built in that collectability aspect of numbering it. So they're saying that this watch, this specific model, the LHD, isn't going to be around forever, and maybe it's worth investing in. Who knows? In the end of the day, as far as it goes, it's still a really good watch. It's still, the Pelagos still's got that great in-house movement to it. $4,400, certainly not inexpensive, but most brands with, sport brands with this kind of level of manufacturing and in-house movements with COSC ratings, 70-year power reserve, silicon escapement, all that stuff, you're not finding that under $5K typically. So, it's a great value no matter how you look at it, and a very cool watch. Please read the full review on Worn and Wound. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you.